Are you making quilting mistakes that could easily affect where your projects reveal themselves to you? Is it becoming frustrating that these simple little acts of quilting is making you so frustrated that you're thinking of giving up? Well, in today's video, I want to be able to provide with you some tips and tricks that will help you to eliminate such problems, and hopefully you can enjoy making your projects so much better. So today I'm going to talk you through, for me and my personal experience, 8 common quilting mistakes that I made when I was starting out in my quilting journey. So let's dive right in and get excited to learn something new. And if you're a beginner, welcome to my channel, and I hope that I can teach you something today and hopefully alleviate some of these stresses that quilting may be causing you. And if you are an experienced quilter, jot your experiences down below. Share with me what common mistakes that you made and possibly still making to this day since you started quilting. And if you have overcome them, share with us what you've overcome and the tips and tricks that you use to solve the problem. All right, so let's dive into this video right now. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video, as I said in the intro, we're going to discuss some quilting mistakes, and I have 8 of them that I want to share with you. So let's get started right into it. So my first mistake that I made when I started quilting, and I'm going to put all of them on the screen as I discuss them, and hopefully, as I said, we can eliminate them. Now, on many occasions you would have heard me say, do not press your do not press your fabric, especially when you're piecing fabric, too hot of a temperature. And I do find that sometimes it can wilt the fabric and make it out of shape. So that was my first mistake that I make, pressing on a very high temperature. My advice to you is to lower that temperature. I'm not saying it has to be cool or cold, because obviously we want the snap or that sort of really sharp edge to the fabric to actually come through. However, too hot of an iron, imagine a really big face of an iron on a small piece of fabric covering the whole edge of that fabric. It wilts it, it burns it, and yes, it may be cotton, but it's still, in my experience, and especially if you're not using cotton and you're a beginner and you are using, say, polycotton. Polycotton is a blend of polyester and cotton, and polyester hates high heat. So I would say definitely do not add too much of a hot heat when pressing your fabric. I think the most smartest way to get rid of any creases that you would like, especially if you're trying to flatten your seams, is to use one of these. Just use a roller, a seam roller, and it usually helps to open up those seams and, you know, get your block pieces right. But if you must press, I definitely say no steam and a very cool iron. Let's move on to number 2. Okay, so one of my other experiences that I remember quite well is when I was sewing. What we tend to do is not look where we're going. And I hope that sort of resonates with you and sort of makes sense, okay? We're not looking where we're supposed to be sewing. A lot of us, when we are sewing, we are looking at the needle. We are not positioning our fingers to guide the fabric, because on your sewing machine there is an area that you can guide your fabric to stay straight, and it eliminates us from sewing straight. And so some of you find it difficult in sewing straight. That's because you are not looking where you're going. You are concentrating on that needle going up and down. And so the best thing to do to remove that issue is to line up your fabric right next to the edge where it says the 1/4 inch seam, and stay on that guide. And all sewing machine comes with that particular guide. You line up your fabric there and you stay straight. and because you're staying straight, it will help you to actually sew correctly. Another way to help you sew straight is also to get a presser foot, a 1/4 inch feet with a guide at the side here, and that helps you to actually stay on the path. It hooks the fabric right underneath, and so therefore once you are sewing, it really guides you to stay straight and to get an accurate 1/4 inch seam. So if you're having that problems, try those 2 tips and see if that helps you. Let's move on to quilting mistake number 3. Okay, not squaring up your blocks. How many of you have experienced when you've made your quilt top that it doesn't sit flat on the table? You flap it all out, you iron it, and you pour it onto that tabletop, and all of a sudden you notice, well, it's not sitting flat. That's because you did not square up your fabric. You did not square up your block. And what that leads to and and what I'm saying this is because once you have assembled that squares of fabric for your piecing, it is too late by then. Well, you could unpick it, but how many of us is actually going to do that? Let's be honest, because it's a lot of work. But to eliminate having to do that, I would definitely say square up properly, and I will tell you how to square up. But let me tell you first what actually happens when you don't square up. And if you're an experienced quilter, you will be able to recognize this. And I could remember one of my, I think it was my first or second quilt, I couldn't understand why when I sewed everything together and I lay my quilt top on top of my batting, why was it that some places, in some areas, it was sitting flush onto the batting, and in some areas it was like there was a sea. There was like a hover of the fabric. And I soon realized that because I did not take the time to piece, to measure up and to square up, that was the reason. And you may think that a slight, 1/4 inch may not make a difference, but you've got to think about it as an overall 1/4 inch. So if every 2-3 blocks you did not square up properly, or you didn't square up at all, and some of the blocks was right and some of the blocks was incorrect, you will find that certain areas in your quilt top, there will be a sort of a dome, and it's not sitting flush. And when you do baste, what will happen is that you find that you will get pleats in the quilting, and that's because it's not squared up properly. So to eliminate that, make sure you square up to whatever size the actual pattern says. Now let's talk about the act of squaring up. A lot of us get confused of how to do that, and there are 2 ways. You got your block to do that. You've got your normal ruler to square it properly, and I would say take the time to actually learn to use your rulers to square up accurately. It will save you so much time within the piecing and assembling the whole quilt top, and also for the basting as well as the quilting. It's just really important, and these are the minute mistakes that sometimes as new quilters we tend to eliminate. And I don't think we're eliminating them because we are being lazy. I think sometimes we underestimate the importance of it, and though it may be a minute step, it's a very important step. So make sure you square up in order to have the result that you want to have with your quilt. That is so important. All right, let's move on to number 4. Another mistake, and I have to laugh. I am laughing because I can recall the frustration when I did this one. Is not measuring before you add your sashings or your borders, and just deciding to cut. I tell you, it's amazing when you look back and you see how much you have traveled in your quilting, in whatever projects that you are doing, whatever skill set you have. It's so grand to look back and you see where you've grown, and you can look back and say, wow, I cannot believe I did that. But as simple as it may be, this common mistake of not measuring your quilt top in order to add your borders, it is such a powerful step that makes your quilt top square up so well. It also eliminates the fact that once you add your binding, it's not wavy. And that's the best way that I can relate it. Have you ever noticed whereby when you finish your quilt, you realize for some reason the edges of my binding, where my quilt ends, is the fact that it's not sitting flush on the table? Why is that? That's because you use bias edges in order to create your binding or to cut your binding. And so if you simply measured your quilt top, especially if your quilt top also has lots of bias edges, and that's because you haven't cut on the correct grain. But if you've cut on the correct grain, that eliminates that issues. However, if you also find yourself using the bias edges, one of the ways to get your quilt top really structured is to measure it. Never measure on the edge of your quilt top. You always measure at least 10 inches in from the edge that you are going to add the borders on. One of the reasons for that is because once you've cut, and many times we tend to cut the borders on the straight grain because that is the structure of it. It's going to square up your quilt really well, and that's because those bias edges are no longer going to be, because now you've taken your borders, you've measured it 10 inches in from the border, and that gives you an accurate measurement. Because if you cut at the end, what you can find is that it's going to be all loose, it's going to be a different size. But measuring 10 inches in from the end on each four corners, what that tends to do is allow you then, and even though you may find that it may be probably a quarter of an inch short at the end, because remember, our sewing machine has those feed dogs and it will take in those two fabrics together, so your border and your quilt top. And for some strange reason, it just works. And what it does is allow the border to go right to the end, because obviously by this time, your quilt top should be facing down, okay? And your border on top. So you're adding the border on top, but the feed dogs is moving in a way that it allows the stretchy fabric to literally magically join to the end of the border, hence making your end of the result of your quilt sit flush on the table. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. So always measure inward 10 inches, because that gives you a more accurate measurement of what the quilt top is, rather than measuring at the end, because at the end may have your bias edges. So measuring inside will allow you to square up your quilt a lot more easier. Okay, so the next one is misunderstanding finished and unfinished blocks. I think this is one of the things that used to confuse me when I first started quilting, and I couldn't understand why quilters would refer to it. And personally speaking, I think it's a pointless exercise to refer to it as finished and unfinished. I think irregardless, the finish size is what's important. Okay, now the reason why I say that, and let me explain what does unfinished and finished mean. So for example, you have a pattern for a quilt block, okay, and it's showing you how to make the quilt block. What the pattern would say is finished size is 12 inches, unfinished size is 12 and a half. So unfinished size mean that it is not the complete size of the block. Well, to be honest, I think it's kind of pointless to say that. The finished size of the block is going to be 12, because realistically all blocks go into a quilt. That's how I see it. So I think, and that's why I couldn't comprehend why would someone put that on a, but we do it. We do it because it's the norm. It's how quilting patterns was written years ago, and so it's continued to practice. But I do feel that it, in a sense, it confuses the new quilter, and especially a younger quilter as such, because, well, I really shouldn't say younger, because whether we start at a golden age or we start at a younger age, it doesn't really matter. I think sometimes the golden age can take it a little bit longer to get into the practice of quilting, because it is quite of a mass of information to actually take in. But going back to the finished size and the unfinished size. So just remember that the finished size is the size that they're referring to that will end up on your quilt. That's it, basically. And it took me a little while to get that. And for some of you may think, well, is that really easy, Karen? Well, no, it is, in a sense, but I couldn't comprehend, why would you tell me the unfinished size? The size of the block is what the size of the block is going to be. And why stipulate it in a pattern? I think referring to it within the method of making, saying the block will be complete or the block will be sewn together with the size of 12.5, but excuse me, once sewn into the quilt is going to be a 12-inch. So sometimes, I don't know if you've ever noticed, I don't always say the finished size. I may do it for a quilt alone, because I feel that some people really need to understand that or write it into their pattern. And I also feel that for some people, they feel comforted that the fact that they can measure the quilt block and realize, okay, right, it's the size that the pattern says. Okay, so I understand the step, but I think in comprehension wise, it just didn't make sense to me. But I understand why it is presented in a pattern. But for those of you who are confused, the finished size is referred to the size that is used within the quilt top. So when you look at your quilt, it will measure 12 inches. I know. It's just the way how things just work out to be. This quilting game is a game, you know. There are so many stories, there's so many ways of doing stuff, and this is why I always say your quilts are your quilts. They are the method in which you prepare them. And some people criticize me for my relaxed my relaxed way of approaching quilting, but I do feel it is a personal journey. It is not a journey whereby everyone takes the same direction. And so my way may not be your way, and then my way may be some ways that other people can actually relate to, because I like to break it down into nonsensical behavior, in the sense that why make it so difficult? And I think that's how we learn on numerous occasions, whereby we just break it down and say it's A plus B. That's it. It is not A plus B plus C plus E. Don't complicate it. It's simplified so that we all can just join in. That's how I look at things. All right, so let's move on to the next one. All right, so number 6 on the list of quilting mistakes is the snobbery of quilting cotton. I don't know, some people are going to be but listen, what I mean by that is that I do feel it's a mistake that is made. You do not have to use cotton thread for only your piecing, or even you can use whatever you want. I think, and the reason why I use the word snobbery is because some people will say, oh, you've got to use cotton thread on cotton fabric. I'm sorry, that's just totally wrong, in my personal opinion. Okay, quilting is the art of gifting something beautiful made with love to someone. I think the person who's receiving the quilt, whether you give it made free or you buy or you sell it, they are not too worried about whether or not you use poly cotton or you use Aurifil, or you use Guthman. They're not really concerned about that. What they are concerned about is how beautiful it looks, how soft it feels, and it carries on. It's the job that it's made to do. So I would say a quilting mistake is thinking that you have to use high quality thread. And I think that's just a snobbish way of treating a craft. I think it's unnecessary, and it adds extra pressure to people who are just getting into quilting, and it's unnecessary. Quilting is very personalized. If you want to use the expensive top of the range thread, go for it. By no means should you carry that to somebody else's budget or performance or how they feel about quilting. I once read an article whereby someone used polycotton to piece together their quilt top, and then they read that, oh, you should only be using cotton for piecing. And the fact is that she was considering to to rip it all apart. And that's unimaginable, that someone will feel so reduced to the fact that they felt that they did the wrong thing, that after piecing the whole quilt together, they were considering ripping it all out because someone said, you're wrong for using polycotton. And I think that is just a huge quilting mistake, that is advice that's given to others. And I've seen quilters do it on YouTube, and it was one of the things that made me feel that probably I am not doing it right because I'm not using the expensive threads. And I don't have to call the full range of cotton expensive, top of the range. I don't have to name them all. You know them. You've heard other people refer to them, So I would say is to throw that out the door. I mean, literally open the door and throw that thinking that you have to use expensive brands to do your piecing. That's wrong. You don't have to do that. You do what makes you happy. That's my advice to you. You do what makes you happy. You buy what thread corresponds with your budget, corresponds with your pocket, but makes you happy. Okay? So don't fall into that trap. Don't fall into that mistake to burden yourself, because what I feel happens is that when you tell somebody that they've got to buy expensive thread, and you look at that thread and the price of that thread is going to put you off. Once that puts you off, it's going to think, well, probably this is not for me. Probably quilting is not for me, because the expense alone is going to throw you off. And we don't want that. We want everybody to be involved, isn't it? So I would say use what makes you happy. Polycotton thread is fine. In a nutshell, polycotton thread is fine. What I would say, a good strong quality cotton thread for quilting is important. The piecing, I don't fuss about that, but I will definitely say, and I would never tell you, you've never heard me say, buy this thread because it's the best. I may say, buy this particular thread because it's good for quilting and your machine will love it, because I know it's strong and it eliminates the breakage. The breakage is what's going to wear you down, because the breakage means constant stopping and rethreading the machine for quilting. So I would say invest in good thread, cotton thread for quilting. And not every machine likes every thread. As a school teacher, I have worked with many types of sewing machine, and we used to buy the cheaper ones, the middle of the range ones, and sometimes we would buy one or two expensive, threads just to make sure the machines were happy. And sometimes the best machine will be happy with the cheaper threads. And then some would, the most actually I found, prefer the middle. Yeah, so that good quality cotton preferred the middle. And that brand I used to use was Oatsmoon or Coatsmoon, that was it. And the machines loved it. But some machines don't. Some of my machines here don't like that brand because I brought that brand to me from the UK and they don't like it. So I had to again research so that the right machine would love the thread I'm referring to. This one at the back here of me, that one didn't like Coats Moon. I had to find the right one that suited. So hence the reason why I said don't be bamboozled, don't be fooled, don't be, swayed by the quilting snobs, and they are. They are quilting snobs. It is amazing, isn't it, that human beings will take something and try to make a level. So you're at this level and I'm at this level and you're at this level, in something that we all should just enjoy. It's amazing how we see, where people must fit into their place, so to speak. And you know what I'm referring to. It's just quilting and it's a fun thing to do, and it's something that we do out of love, to share our blanket of love with everyone else. So do what makes you happy, and I really mean that, because I think out of all the quilted mistakes, I think for me that one really used to have me sort of well, my quilts won't be the best because I am not using Aurifil. It's even ludicrous to even say it now, and I'm so happy that I spoke to myself and said, Karen, you use what you want to do. So I'm sharing my experience with you so that you too will not feel that you've got to run out and break your budget to buy an expensive brand. Okay, buy what makes you happy. If Aurifil is for you, you do what makes you happy. But please don't be pressured into using that, and find a thread that works for your machine. All right, guys. All right, so let's move on to number 7. All right, so the next one is not buying enough fabric. I know I am definitely guilty of that. And I think the mistake comes in because we do not understand the size that the quilt top can reach to eventually. Right? And the reason why I say that is that when I first started, I remember I would probably buy about half of a meter, and it just didn't. I am just laughing because sometimes you just gotta laugh at yourself, because you can see where you have grown. But I never used to buy enough, and I always had to go back to the fabric store, which means I was spending more money, which means I was wasting more time, which means that the quilt project took even longer to get completed, and also which means that you may not find the fabric that you that you initially fell in love with. So what I do now to eliminate the habit of having to go back and get more fabric, is to buy a lot more. So for me, when I buy yardage, I probably most likely buy about 5 to 6, because then I know I have enough. And if I am going to, sort of curate my own sort of fabric bundle, so to speak, I will buy enough of each individual fabric so that I can create my own sort of bundles, to make myself, because I don't necessarily like buying the fat quarter bundle and the layer cakes. I like to create my own layer cakes. So hence the reason, if I know that it's my project, that I'm going to create my own set of layer cake bundle, then I will buy a lot more yardage, because I don't want to be disappointed in actually going to the fabric store. Another thing I think a lot of people do wrong is that they will initially not take, I would say a good advice is to take your pattern to the fabric store. Definitely, because we forget, don't we? We go there with the excitement of buying the items or the the fabric for the piecing, but not the fabric for the backing. Okay, not the fabric for the borders. So, not the fabric for the binding. So I would say definitely take your quilt pattern with you, and then when you go to the fabric store you can take off everything that you actually need. So, and that eliminates the longevity of the whole project, you know, in a sense, making you less frustrated and then making you not come off of your course, because once we're in that zone we want to stay there in that creative mindset. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Now this one I don't think a lot of people do. Still to this day, even when they buy a brand new machine. And this is not reading your manual. I don't think a lot of people do that, because a lot of people do not know how to operate their sewing machines to its fullest, to the full advantage of how to work that machine and all that it has to offer. I think as a new beginner or even an experienced quilter, because we have the idea of we know how to sew, a lot of us just throw the manual to the side and we don't really get to know your sewing machine. And I think it's a huge mistake. I think you are underusing your machine when you don't take the time to research it. You don't take the time to really read through the manual so that you know what the machine has to offer. The machine is there to help make your life so much more easier when you are using it. But a lot of us eliminate spending time with it. When I buy a new sewing machine, I am so excited, and this may sound really nerdy and boring, but I am so excited to sit there with my manual and read it. And for me, it is the time to play with the machine because I want to get to know it. And if there's something I do not understand, that is when I go to the internet and try to find out more about the sewing machine. And if I feel I cannot get what I'm looking for, then I go to the person who sold it to me. You know, I'll go back to the manufacturer. I'll phone up the line and say, well, you know what? I'm finding it difficult to understand blah, 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 blah. Whatever it is, you know, can you help me understand this? And I think it's such a huge mistake to not read your manual. It is such an expensive commodity that I think to undervalue, underestimate what it can actually do for you to make your life so much easier and not spend time getting to know it is a big loss to yourself. It's a huge loss. The simple act of pressing the up and down where the needle is so that once the machine stops, it stops in. The simple act of threading the machine, the simple act of knowing where to actually include the bobbing and to thread the thread around the correct way. Because, you know, if you don't do these little steps, this can make you so frustrating. It really can. So I would definitely say take the time, read the manual. It is so important. It tells you what each of your machine feet are for. Did you know that a lot of times when you buy an expensive sewing machine, especially the quilting machine, you get different quilting feet and they all have a different purpose. All the sewing feet have a different purpose that can help you. So in my advice for that will be the last one, is to simply definitely read your manual. It can save you so much more frustration than you would actually know. And I would say definitely as a bonus, if you're a quilter, make other things, make other projects so that it will help you to learn more about the machine. Okay, many times our machine has fantastic stitches that we can even use as quilting, but we don't because we get so caught up in just doing what everybody else does. And I think to be better than, it's important that you gravitate towards your own individualized learning so that you can stretch yourself. I'm all about stretch and learn. you stretch yourself to learn this. Okay, right, you've gotten to this point, move on to the next and stretch yourself again, so that you have so much more knowledge when it comes to this whole industry that you are. And self-taught is good. Self-taught is good because self-taught allows you to make the mistakes and learn from it. That's the key, is to learn from it. So guys, I hope that these 8 common quilting mistakes, that I've shared with you today from my personal experience has helped you to move on, forward in your quilting journey. And it is a journey. It's a journey that sometimes we jump on because we're excited. We fall into it because of a friend, or we saw a quilt, or we saw some YouTube channels and we thought to ourselves, we can do this. And you can, but you just need to check yourself at each point. And as I said, I hope my 8 quilting mistakes has helped you. So as I said at the beginning, if you've got any mistakes that you used to make at the start of your quilting journey, please share with me down below. And if this video has brought you any value, please like, share and subscribe. The simple act of sharing this video or any of my videos is so much more grand and helpful to my channel, and it lets me know that you like content such as this. So bye for now, happy quilting, and I'll definitely see you in the next one, guys. Love you loads, and for all of the support you've given me so far, I value you. Bye for now and happy quilting.